Hi, welcome back. So let me reintroduce myself. My name is Kessler. I'm Associate Director of Learning Sciences and Teaching for MIT Open Learning, the residential group. We are the folks who helped put on this event. So it was said earlier, but I want to circle back to take this moment to thank my colleague, Jovi Nazareno, who without none of this goes together. So thank you, Jovi. Seriously, it is amazing to have an awesome team member who you can trust with all of these things, and so thank you, Jovi. The purpose of this panel, this conversation, is to bring together some people who have been doing some work, changing their subject classes to improve and address challenges that they were seeing in the courses that they were teaching, and do it in a sort of purposeful way through a series of conversations and summer work that our office helps conduct. So we're going to hear a little bit from each panelist in terms of what they've been working on and why. I'm going to share a little bit about what that program is. And then we're going to have sort of an open conversation. It really, I hope, is going to be a conversation. So first, we'll start with introductions. We'll go down the line and meet our panelists.
Thank you. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you for inviting us here. My name is Paola Rebusco, and I am Senior Lecturer at the Experimental Study Group. That's one of MIT's first-year learning communities. And my main job is to teach physics, in particular the GIRs. However, I also have the opportunity to teach new interdisciplinary seminars and subjects, and that's part of what we will be talking about today.
Yes, hello everybody. My name is Cory Romanov. I just graduated with my bachelor's degree in physics this past June from MIT, and now I work for now I work for the physics department as a technical instructor. So I do kind of two things. I help facilitate the day-to-day operations of our advanced undergraduate laboratory with Sean Robinson, who is on your far right. And I also help support our kind of introductory physics sequence as sort of a teaching assistant role.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to moderate. My name is Khotimsky. I'm Senior Lecturer in Russian. I work in the Global Languages section, and I've had the pleasure of working with my wonderful student, McKenzie, during the summer of 2023, so we will reflect on the project. That's 2 years already in the making.
Hi, I'm McKenzie Dinesen. I'm a senior here at MIT. I'm studying aerospace engineering, and then I also have a minor in Russian and Eurasian studies, which is why I've worked with Professor Khotimsky so much.
Sean Robinson, I'm a lecturer in the physics department where I run the physics education group. That's a relatively new group, but my main day job is I run our advanced undergraduate lab, junior lab as it's more commonly known. I've been doing that for about 15 years.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for coming and being part of the conversation today to reflect on some of the work you've been doing. So the work that they mentioned is part of the Canvas Innovation Fund. So for those that don't know, our group runs a set of projects over the summer where we invite faculty, course teams, instructors to submit to have work done with our office, sort of our group helping oversee the work of students, to support transformational change within the Canvas site that helps run the class. And so 3 projects were sort of represented up here of 15 that have run over the last 2 summers. And I want to start by just hearing a little bit about, when you were sort of first hearing about this opportunity, what challenge or problem for the learners did you hope to address by coming and being part of this work? Paola, we can start with you.
Yeah. So the course for which we really made many use of the funds is called Hack Yourself, Data-Driven Wellbeing and Learning. And I've been co-developing and co-teaching this course together with Annabelle from computer science, Carter Jernigan, who is an alumnus, also computer science, and he also has a master in positive psychology, and Andreas Karatsolis from the writing, from the rap. So we ran this seminar as an advising seminar in the fall. We will run it again now in the spring as a pass-fail seminar, and we're hoping to develop it into 12 units class, hopefully a CIH. We were really interested in having the help from Canvas, from the Canvas Fund, because it's very interdisciplinary. So we had different kinds of assignments, and we weren't sure about how to make the student experience the smoothest, the best. So it was of key importance to have the student learning technologist. Melina Bash was our LT, and her input was invaluable. We also wanted to be sure to have a landing page that would make the rest of the navigation as easy as possible. And because we had a mix of content that went from reading to coding, then just working independently would have been really difficult. And I'm happy to tell you much more about the seminar if you want, but I don't want to take all the time, and about the content also.
Perfect, thank you. Maria?
Sure. Well, I first would like to give a shout out to Joseph Barkowski, instructional technology specialist in global languages. He deserves a round of applause because he keeps abreast of many things that are happening at the Institute. So in late spring 2023, Joseph sent out this announcement about the new Canvas Innovation Fund. And at that point, we were coming out of the pandemic. We have developed many activities that can be done asynchronously or in a hybrid manner. And we were seeking to integrate them in our basic language sequence. We were, in fact, we decided to transition from 4 in-person meetings to 3 times of in-class, in-person meetings, and 1 asynchronous day. And honestly, as an instructor, I was excited about the opportunities and the flexibility it offered, but I also struggled a little bit how to integrate these tasks and how to make the Canvas interface more meaningful and more accessible to the students. And this is where I think working with McKenzie was a gift, actually, in making this class better for the future generations of students. So.
Thank you. Sean?
Yeah, so Junior Lab is a large, complicated class for, mostly for upper level physics majors with lots of learning goals. The title of the class is something like Experimental Physics 1, but it's more about the development of the student as a professional in the field, all the learning attitudes and skills and how those things integrate together in a professional. It's a CIM class, for example. We had previously been through some pretty detailed curriculum redesigns, 10 years ago, a lot of it funded by Darbeloff funds. And we had a course we liked, and then in the pandemic, the schema we had, this sort of intricate jigsaw puzzle of which assignments are due before this assignment with how much prep time and so forth, all of that fell apart, which gave us an opportunity, like many people knew, since we had to reinvent things on the fly. It let us do some of the things we hadn't been doing in our previous iteration of the class. And after we came back from pandemic, we decided to retain a lot of the things we discovered about how to teach. But what we lost was that really intricate, nice, well-designed thing. We had a lot of content that we liked, but it was not a well-designed educational experience. So we had lost that. And so when the call for proposals went out, what I was looking for, if this was a software project, I would have said what we need is a refactor. How do you get all the parts working back together the way they need? And one of the things that was, I would say, somewhat random in the way we had been implementing it for the past couple of years was how we communicated all of the many, many moving parts of the class to our students, which is primarily in the Canvas pages. So along with the overall design of the course, which needed to be realigned to itself, then once we decided what we wanted to do, which was going to be a hard problem, then someone actually had to do that. Someone had to write those things and put them in, format them in a way that made sense with how actual students actually interact with the web pages, with the Canvas site and things like that. So the CIF was a natural fit for us.
Awesome, thanks. So McKenzie, I want to come to you next. So hearing a little bit about what Maria said about what she was hoping to get out of this, how does that sort of match your experience, right? You took this course. You were part of this sort of sequence of courses leading up to that. I'm curious your experience, your perspective going into that summer where you had sort of taken the class and your reflection on what was it like in there?
Yeah, so I think I didn't even realize that like the asynchronous day was supposed to replace a day of class for a long time. And so then when I kind of did realize that, I wanted to make sure that when we were looking at restructuring the Canvas course, it was very clear that this asynchronous day was supposed to be a separate day of class. And so one of the things we looked at doing for that was putting a video of Professor Khotimsky talking at the beginning of like, this is what class is going to look like, and kind of bringing in a bit more of a personal level to a replacement day of class almost. Also making landing pages and things like that was something we looked at a lot to make sure that it was just very clear what a week of class was going to look like. Here are the assignments for each day of class, including asynchronous day, which is kind of something different, and just making all of that very clear. Hyperlinking a lot of things was super, super helpful, because finding things on a Canvas site, especially in, I think, language courses, there's so many resources that you need in regards to vocabulary, grammar, and a lot of other learning resources that you really need to find quickly and often when doing any sort of assignment. So, yeah.
That's great, and I think it goes to show this sort of, for those that don't know, the students are hired as what we call learning technologists to work on sort of implementing the things that need to be done and the changes that need to be made. They're actually the ones building this stuff in Canvas. And so your point about this sort of like having that frame of reference a little bit of what it was, and this understanding of like, oh, this is different, but it's the same in these ways. What does that mean for the learner, I think is a key one. Cory, I'm curious, you went through junior lab, you had sort of experienced it in sort of a transitional form through the pandemic in some ways, right? And through your experiences before that. I'm curious about your experience sort of leading into that and how that framed out some of your thoughts.
Yeah, so I think that with me and Sean, we happened to meet each other at just the right time in kind of my journey as an educator. So I had been actively involved in various kind of outreach programs with MIT for quite a while. I graduated this past June, and that summer, so this past summer, I had my first major instructional experience with the Interface Edge program, which is our bridge program for incoming freshmen. And I think that small teaching and intensive summer course to incoming MIT freshmen was my first major instructional experience of that magnitude. So, 18 lectures, a midterm, a final. And I think me having gone through that experience over the summer as I was working as a learning technologist made me all the more sympathetic to the plight of instructors here, because I knew that it was a lot of work, but developing my own class in tandem with helping Sean redesign Junior Lab, I think gave me both sides of the coin, because I could look at things from an instructional perspective, and then I also, as a student who had just taken the class, I could also see how to best make a site that would facilitate a learning experience that was easily navigable for a student, but that also served the learning objectives set forth by Sean and the larger kind of JLab team. So in particular, it was a big undertaking, and very similar to the language class in that there's a wide variety of resources that students need to interact with for an experimental physics class. And mainly because JLab is kind of set forth to try to mimic a laboratory environment, we communicate via Slack, there's various PDFs that the students have to interact with, there's the Canvas site, and we also have kind of an MITx repository. So having to blend all these things together into an experience that was easily manageable from a student perspective was quite a challenge. But I think in the broader context, I think Sean and I, our partnership came just at the right time, because as I said, I was able to understand what Sean wanted to do from an instructional perspective and understand what those learning objectives were. But also me just having finished the class, I could understand how the old Canvas infrastructure sometimes undermined student ability to interact with the site in a way that maybe was intended.
Perfect, thank you. So Paola, I'm going to come back to you for a question about sort of making choices over this sort of cycle of work, and this idea of like, how did you decide to incorporate what was built into your course, and what was integrated, and what did you use this term? What did you find helpful in that work?
Yeah. So I'll start by saying that as we were meeting with Melly and also with you, trying to discuss, we had various meetings, 3 meetings, I think, over the summer. We were also in the process of designing the course itself. And so as we were making decisions for the Canvas site, that also helped us in the decision about what we wanted for our course. I thought it helped on multiple sides. And because we had started with some learning objectives, some activities, and as we talked, we realized better what the student experience would have been. So for example, initially we were thinking, they're very simple things, but initially we were thinking, oh, we don't need to use the Canvas calendar, it's not as important. And then talking with Melly, turns out that for students, it's actually very, very useful to have all the deadlines in their Canvas calendar because everything is embedded. We wanted to organize really the landing page in a way that would flow from what's in one class to what's in between classes and then back to the following class, not necessarily in the form of the weekly PSET, because we had discussions, reflections, intentions that the students were working on. And it was really, through different iterations, then we found what was the best setup, which was really a table with hyperlinks. And I hadn't thought about the color scheme, for example. These are all things that came up from the group interactions. And how that could help and how we could make that color scheme actually accessible for everybody and also for people who would use Canvas, not necessarily on the laptop, but also on their cell phones, which I understand. That's a big part of it.
Yeah, no, I think it's, you mentioned those sort of small iterations within the course of the CIF project, right? Where you're sort of making decisions and that informs the next cycle and sort of those things are getting done within the context of the work. In your case, right, it's towards a class for the first time. Shauna, I'm curious about this resonating in what I'm assuming are bigger cycles of change for your course especially, where you weren't doing it for the first time. You had some deep knowledge of like, I know how students are going to interact maybe with this content or these things. So I'm curious how maybe some of those cycles looked a little different for you.
Yeah. So both we have that infrastructure, but we also have this sort of responsibility to maintain this existing capital that I inherited from decades of previous instructors as well. So so one of the challenges is there, as an expert in my field, an expert in physics, I have cognitive blind spots that there's things that the novice students see in what I'm teaching that I don't see. But as an expert educator, which I like to think of myself somewhat as, it's where I spent most of my career, more as a teacher than a physicist, I'm aware that expert blind spots exist. But as a human, I don't know what's in those blind spots, right? So one of the key things that was helpful in this was having Cory have Cory in that role to say actually no, the way the student sees this setup is like this, not the way we're seeing it. And one of the key examples was very early in this collaboration that Cory convinced me, no, this thing you've been doing is not good. What you need to do is this other thing.
Tell us what the thing
I will get to I will absolutely get to the thing. It was once you convinced me of that, it was okay, I now trust you on everything else that we're going to do. And it was basically just the way the landing page was. So Canvas is a product of this century. MIT, we started adopting it in 2020. It's sort of an existing framework, and we were trying to move over from our old learning management system to Canvas very quickly. So you do the easy thing, which is I have an old web page. Let me just copy the content over. And so the landing page for our course it's a typical welcome web page. There's a paragraph, welcome to Junior Lab. A little paragraph that sort of would be the first paragraph from the syllabus. And it may be an expansion of what the course description is in the course catalog. Some basic description of what the course is, what the goals are, and then it gets into the mechanics of the course. And that's what the landing page is every time a student comes and lands on the page. Cory explained to me, students need to see that once. Not every single day that they come to the Canvas page. What we need, particularly in a course where the focus is professional development, and we want as much as possible the artifacts of the students taking a course to just be something that's part of, a little bit on the side. We want the interactions to be genuine and professional, things like that. So we want the Canvas page to not interfere as much with that. It's the delivery of the course content and then gets out of the way as much as possible. So this landing page needs to be here's the thing you need to do. Here's number one, number two, number three, and kind of just gets out of the way. And it doesn't need to be a page of description of what the course is every single time the students land on it, and then they have to scroll to find the thing that they actually care about. Then they will trust the site, and then they will go to it. And like you're saying, the calendar, having everything in the course calendar on Canvas and getting to the point where the students just can trust it, was huge. So yeah, so the landing page was a big.
Can I add something? Because this really resonates also with my experience. And I want to add that Melly was our student. She was very efficient, and so I asked her to help me also redesign my ESG class, physics classes. That's the equivalent of 8012 and 8022. So that exactly the landing page would actually be something that the students would use. And so it's a clickable calendar with all the assignments and what's relevant that day, and it's not the course information, although you can still find the course information when you need it. And so it was so successful, the fact that we modified that it made it much easier than the following semesters to adapt the same model. And now I'm teaching recitations for mainstream 8022. And we're adopting the same. Because until, before the summer, we had the structure with the Canvas modules. That's something that we had started with in 2020 when we had that week of trying to put everything online. And yes, we had made changes, but they were not major changes. And what I thought was good navigation was actually terrible.
Yeah.
Well, starting from the seminar, now we're changing also, other GIR.
That's great. So we have sort of this example of like building from the beginning and change, pretty significant cycles of multiple change. And then Marie, we've got this other set of work that you were sort of doing where it was sort of like in the middle of this experiment that you were doing about this asynchronous day, sort of reworking a course that had been working pretty well. You took a leap to make this change. It wasn't something you had to do. You felt strongly about it. So I'm curious to hear how sort of your cycles of iteration with both inside the project and in the larger context of your work sort of played out in.
Sure, yeah, thank you for your question. And to echo Sean, we are responsible for the content that we're teaching. So there is a Russian second-year curriculum that is still there. So in terms of content, it hasn't changed much. But I think in our innovation, we tried to balance a student autonomy. We also tried to create more individually anchored tasks so that asynchronous day where students engaged with different tasks, but also had multiple opportunities of one-on-one interactions with the instructor or peer interactions about which they will then reflect. Those were all hopefully positive innovations, but I think what I struggled with is the communicating these innovations and kind of the meta mapping of the class, the meta mapping of the structure, and explaining to students the value of this asynchronous day and how we're going to work with it. So I think talking with McKenzie, I think the first step with Canvas Innovation Fund was meeting with McKenzie and also Lauren and Meredith from Open Learning and discussing, okay, what are we doing here? We are not bringing a lot of new content. We're actually not developing significantly new formats. We're making some adjustments and we're integrating some new activities. So it boiled down to kind of improving and reassessing the meta structure of the class and how we communicate the value of what students are supposed to do. And I'm very grateful to McKenzie for giving this feedback to me. It allowed me to see, as like Sean said, the blind spots. Like when we teach, we live in these classes year in, year out. We live in the syllabus and everything is like so clear and transparent and wonderful. But looking at the class from the point of view of McKenzie, but also examining it with colleagues at Open Learning made me realize that it's just not enough what I've been doing, that there should be more of this, more meaningful short messages about what we're doing every week. And of course, language learning may be different from other subjects you're teaching, but for us, it's incremental steps, what we cover, what we make sure we know, and how these tasks connect to each other, as Paola mentioned. So just adding that touch of reflectivity on the point of instructors and on the point of students, hopefully was helpful, and I'm working hard to make it part of all of our classes in the basic language sequence. So I hope this answers your question.
Yeah, that's great, and I think it sort of shows the sort of different levels and structures, and you come with very different goals, all of you, and yet this sort of process sort of unfolds in a way that allows you to get to where you wanted to get to. McKenzie, I'm going to come to you, sort of hearing that, and then to sort of ask this question of, how did your experience taking the course, and then even through some of the training that we sort of do for the LT work, how did that impact some of the ideas you brought forward? How did that help you say, actually, what about this? Or maybe not that?
Yeah. I think with this class, it's unique because we don't use a textbook for the class. So it's organized by topics, and it'll kind of transition, like we're in 1.1 and then 2.1 new topic. And so the Canvas site was very much organized by topic, which I think makes sense. However, from the student perspective, when looking to find assignments and when your asynchronous Thursday is supposed to be and like what those assignments are, when it's organized by topic and you have in this topic like 4 homework assignments and 1 asynchronous Thursday, but the next one you have like 6 homework assignments and 2 asynchronous Thursdays, it makes a little bit more sense to organize it by week almost and kind of intermixing the topics, which seems a little strange, I think, from the instructor side, because why would I mix together the different topics into like a specific module in Canvas? But having the module in Canvas be like landing page with the outline for the week, here are the assignments hyperlinked, here's what your asynchronous Thursday is going to be, and then the other items in those modules, the homework assignments and the asynchronous Thursday, and then like any other resources you need for that week. Because I think how originally the site was, it was all the homework assignments in one section, which is also helpful for finding. But yeah, it was just like, I think small changes also. I noticed like when doing homework assignments, it would list it in the module for that day of what we're supposed to be doing as homework 2.1. But then when I would go look for the homework assignment, they would all be labeled homework number 7 or something like that. So it was hard to find exactly which one I would be doing, and I'd have to compare like due dates. So like really, really small changes with just the names of the assignments, I think. And then I think another thing with what you're saying with the learning technologist training that we did, it was like a guided module, which I'd never really seen in a Canvas site actually integrated in any of my courses. And so I think that's something that I brought up to Maria about potentially integrating into the very beginning of like, it's one of those modules where you enter it and you have to complete something or finish reading it to move on to the next thing. You can't like look at it without skipping something, or with skipping something. So doing that at the very beginning and making it sure that every student has to read through this and knows and understands what the asynchronous thing is going to look like, I think was helpful.
Absolutely, yeah, and if I may quickly echo, I think if we were to talk about the biggest changes, this switch from the topic-based system to weekly system, which makes your modules a pretty long thing, right? There's 15 of them in the semester, but that was, structurally, it was the very productive adjustment, so thank you.
Yeah, McKenzie, your mentioning of the sort of like making sure everybody knows what this new asynchronous thing is and using this model and thinking about these things. I think what we'll continue to hear throughout all of these things, and what I keep hearing, is also it's not the same, right? Like this isn't like a one-size-fits-all, hey, just do this, right? Like these are very purposeful approaches to address the specific needs, goals, objectives of each of these things, because we know that we can't take Sean's course and use that as a model for Paola's. There has to be some change in there. And so I think engaging in that and leveraging different types of examples and pieces becomes really important. Cory, similar question for you. I'm sort of curious about this. How did these experiences you had, and especially even in the sort of teaching your own course, you had sort of mentioned that earlier. I'm curious, how did these impact both what you're doing then during the CIF project, but also maybe now in your current work, how that's sort of framing out some of the decisions and ideas you bring to the group?
Yeah, so I think for me, working as a learning technologist with the Canvas Innovation Fund was a very transformative experience in how I viewed learning, or I guess course creation, and that before, I think I took a very naive standpoint of, here are my learning objectives and here's the information that I want to convey to the students, and this is what I'll say in class. Whereas really thinking intensely about how to design the Canvas site shifted my mindset a lot more into thinking about how to create, I don't like the word user experience, but I think creating more holistic environment that promotes the students' being able to identify my learning objectives almost without me saying them. So I think trying to design a structure that facilitates the learning in the way that I want without having to kind of explicitly enumerate that structure to the students, I think just going into my future endeavors as an educator now with that design experience, I think has been transformative. On the other side, as a student, I think students are quick to point out all the kind of maybe misgivings about a course, or be quick to give feedback about, I don't know how we're doing this in this particular way. So I think me having worked as an instructor for that summer, again, made me all the more sympathetic to, well, the students may not understand that, this course has two different, we have 3 sections that happen on, Monday, Wednesday, and another one that's on Tuesday and Thursday. So, we can't just enumerate all the assignments on one page because, they get assigned separately. So I think it gave me all the more appreciation for just the limitations of something like a Canvas site and how extra limitations get imposed on, if you're a larger class with multiple sections, that kind of limits how you can present content to students because they may not all be doing the content at the exact same time. But in particular, I really want to echo what was said about the language class, in that I'm surprised that our experience was so similar despite the fact that the courses are entirely different. I think that some of the most exciting things that Sean and I did, so much of the work in the beginning was first us trying to identify what the learning objectives for the class were, and then spending almost an equal amount of time thinking about Canvas structures or learning structures that would facilitate the students interacting with the content in the way that we intended. And ultimately, we landed on a very similar module structure, but in the beginning, what caused so much, I don't want to say friction between me and Sean, but what was the thing that caused the biggest debate was exactly what had been said in that, and now I can speak to this having done kind of things in an instructional role, but I think in the genesis of a course, at least me, I start with a concrete set of learning objectives and just content that I want to deliver to the students. And I think that really manifestly is a different structure than how students interact with the material. And as was said, students really care about what's happening on a day-to-day basis in kind of an itinerary format. But you may be delivering content for multiple different units in a particular day. So we ran into the exact same problem where the way that the old Junior Lab website was organized, it made sense from almost a content repository structure, and that all the material pertaining to a particular experiment or to a particular unit was organized in Canvas in modules that reflected that structure. But as a student, it was demanding, we'll say, to have to pick different things from each individual module for me to kind of put together my own itinerary of things that I needed to do and assignments that I needed to do for that particular day. This was compounded very similarly by the fact that assignments in Junior Lab sometimes, especially in the introductory sequence, you have assignments that you need to do before class, things that are done during class, and things that you then have to do after class. But the Canvas site didn't reflect that complex structure of due dates. And so what we did, Sean and I did, again, we landed on a very similar structure of enumerating all the material for a particular day and embedding that module structure not by content, but rather by individual class sessions and grouping things together in that way, which is almost the complete opposite of how you would envision if you were designing a course. That's not in kind of the first way you would land on kind of content organization.
Yeah, it's interesting. As the resident learning scientist in the room, I think I'll put the word cognitive load onto, right? Like it's managing this idea of cognitive load, of how do we sort of get the students and the learners who are engaged in these courses to focus on the things that we really care about, right? Like the point of doing this wasn't to make it easy for them. It was to get their attention focused on the things you really genuinely wanted them to focus on and leave the rest behind. And so I think across all of these things, we hear that, and that's sort of a common theme amongst some of the pieces. I want to come back to some folks. Sean, we'll start down there and work our way this time. I'm curious, you've made this change, you've run the course, it's happened. Yep. I'm curious about, what do the outcomes look like from your perspective? What is the sort of results, knowing that, it's not explicit like, we didn't collect data necessarily to answer all these things.
Exactly. Yeah, we didn't do this as an experiment.
Right.
We didn't do this as a. We didn't. And for example, like one of the things you want is quiz students in the semester. We didn't do this in the semester, but the students who saw the new content this semester never saw the old version, right? And in my experience, redesigning courses over the years, you never get to a point where everybody is happy with everything you've done. So do we have complaints from our students in our subject evaluations this semester? Absolutely. We don't see them complaining about, I can't find the stuff on Canvas. That's different. There's different things they're complaining about. But yeah, can we put metrics to this? No, we don't have. We didn't design this project as a scientific that would have metrics. We could do that. So we don't have those things. It's all entirely quantitative. As instructors, we feel like we did a good job, but it's entirely sort of these our affective opinions. I do know that so junior lab is part of a 2-semester sequence, and for most physics majors, the first semester is required for most people. That's the course we've been talking about. The second semester is not required for most physics majors, and it's a big, hard course. So it's a relatively small, self-selected group of people who take the second spring semester. Our pre-reg for that course has doubled. From what it was last year, and I'm happy to give Cory all the credit for that. That's not a scientific statement, but we have double the students in our pre-reg than we've had the past few years. So is it because we're not pushing them out by confusing them? And cognitive load certainly come up in a lot of our conversations. Exactly. Just to decide, so Cory talked about our first 2 phases of our sort of arguments with each other, which was a lot of fun. We would have kept arguing forever if we had not been accountable to a project manager who is our, So the only reason the work actually got completed is because of Aaron Kessler.
That's very kind of you. I don't think that's actually true, but I'm glad that I could play a small role.
You gave us deadlines.
I did give you deadlines, yes. There was definitely some guardrails to help keep things on track. Rhea, I'm curious, where do things stand in your cycles?
Yes. I mean, I think of McKenzie pretty much every semester when I prepare my classes. I did switch all the subjects in the language sequence to the weekly module structure. It makes it, of course, more important for learners who learn first semester, second semester, third semester to see this consistency, to see this module structure. I'm so much more aware about cross-navigation, its importance, thanks to McKenzie. So whatever homework assignment I'm assigning, I make sure the whole homework number and the written exercises number are not as confusing as they used to be. And as I mentioned earlier today, some things seem so transparent and so well structured to us as teachers, it's really hard to step out of your own subject. So I highly recommend you, if not participating in this fund, but just like having a one-on-one conversation with a student who's willing to do it. So definitely cross-linking more, adding the resources for each assignment that's required, really thinking what would a student need. And it's all there on Canvas, but just adding those hyperlinks makes that assignment quicker, more effective, more productive. So I think those are the big takeaways, and I also strive to give a lot more of messaging to students. We are doing this today because it's, it will help us do this tomorrow, or this is aiding your experience, or like this is building your skills in this. Just maybe a line before listing the exercise number or the activity task per se. I hope that's helpful. We are seeing positive number changes in our program, but there are so many other factors beyond that. So thank you.
Yep. So there are various things that, like Sean said, we cannot measure. I did not take any formal survey, but anecdotally, I can say that our students, both in the seminar and in the ESG physics classes, they like the navigation and the Canvas size as they are. You don't have the same students taking the same class. However, at ESG, I have undergraduate upper class students who serve as TAs. And so they saw their student experience, and then the following year, they had a new Canvas site, and yes, they were the TAs, but I think that's the closest that I have in terms of comparing, and they were definitely happy about the change. Like I said, we made adaptations. Well, we're making adaptations for the Hack Yourself course because we're thinking of developing into 12 units. So the grading will have to be changed. We meet different times. The way that the data science, positive psychology, and learning aspects, they have to be combined. That will change. I feel that I have better ideas of the tools, and also I can ask for help as part of the process. And in terms of the physics classes, we have considered, for example, to use tools like Perusal, which we weren't using before, and we've been using it in the assignment. I know in the humanities it's very popular to do the reading, and you have comments. It's very collaborative, and it's embedded in Canvas compared, for example, to have the reading on MITx or a different system. And so we've been discussing within ESG about how to make use of Perusal also for our physics readings. And yeah.
Sounds like some more conversations to be had on that front. That's great. No, this is perfect, right? I mean, those are the types of opportunities that lead to new opportunities, and it allows you to identify potentially the next piece, which is sort of a question I have for two former LTs, which is, from your perspectives, what feedback do you have or advice maybe might you give to instructors who are thinking about wanting to try to improve the way they use Canvas or other tools or just their course in general? Like, I'm curious, having gone through this experience, what you might help provide the larger group with ideas. McKenzie, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. I think I was really excited to look at Canvas from the lecturer side once I got kind of the access to that and how many extra resources were available that a lot of classes don't use. So I think exploring those, but also sometimes adding all of those things can be confusing and not necessarily required. So don't add things just to add them necessarily. I also think the instructor side does look pretty different than the student side, but you can click to see the student view. So as you're editing and changing things, clicking that and looking whether you're asking for a student perspective or even just looking yourself from the student view and kind of trying to navigate things and actually see how it's working would be pretty helpful. Yeah, I was really excited. I found out a friend was taking the Russian 3 course after me, and I was like, oh my gosh, how's the Canvas site? And they were like, it's a Canvas site. I don't really know what to tell you. But,
It should be invisible.
I was really proud of
your hard
my
work should be invisible.
Yeah.
That's so great. That's perfect. I love it. Cory is sort of, I know you're sort of still working with the group, but I'm curious as you think about your experience across other courses that you took as part of your undergrad, what advice might you share with some others?
Yeah, so I think, again, in thinking about, for the instructors in the room, if you want to, dive into the weeds and reinvestigate your Canvas site, I think my big advice, I think the thing that really settled me and Sean's, great junior lab debate of the summer of 2024 was I sat down one day and I said, Sean, I want you to go and just cosplay as a student, pretend you're doing, the Compton scattering experiment. I said, just download the lab manual. And he's like, oh, no problem. And so, first things first, it's click to the home page, click to the modules, scroll, for 2 minutes to get down to the bottom, find the right one, go to the experiment page, and then click the link. And he was like, oh. and so I think that was the big nail in the coffin that really sealed the deal on us adapting a more kind of hyperlink style for the homepage. And for me, I think that was an eye-opening experience in that, again, now me having been on the instructor side, I know my Canvas site and I know my learning materials and I know how to interact with them, but as a more novice student who hasn't interacted with these materials for several semesters, if there's no external structure for students to navigate and find the resources that you want, it's just difficult. And I think that the thing that Sean and I realized is just the nested interdependencies of the old Canvas site obscured the information that we really wanted to be most prominent for students on a day-to-day basis. So I think that was the thing that sealed the deal. And I think in closing, the other big thing that I would suggest for instructors wanting to redesign their Canvas site is look at other Canvas sites for classes that are similar to yours. I think some of the biggest improvements that Sean and I had to our site came from investigating what other instructors, not even within our own department, but just elsewhere at MIT, what were they doing to manage, similarly complicated classes and what kind of Canvas structures did they use to help students navigate their sites in a more fluid manner. So I think take inspiration from others within your department or others out, just within the broader MIT community, and I think just take what pieces you find fit your needs, and I think that's my big advice.
Perfect, awesome. So we've got a little bit of time left, and I want to try to open it up for some questions maybe from the audience. So if there are people that have questions for any of our panelists. Do we have? Oh, did you?
Well, I just wanted to
while you're getting a microphone, go ahead.
Yeah, add on to the last thing Cory was saying with the looking through other people's Canvas courses. I think that was what was really cool about the Canvas Innovation Fund is we had these community calls every week where we would take turns sharing kind of what we'd done with the Canvas courses we were changing. And I honestly did get a lot of ideas from that, even though the courses were super different. So I think another plug for the program, yeah.
Thank you. And I love those community calls. They're some of my favorite because you get to see the scope of what's really happening over the summer.
Was there any response? Was that a comment? No question. Is that a question? No question? Oh, okay.
I'll take a shot. I'll take a shot at actually responding, which I think is and it also is dependent on the specific course and how you're trying to encourage students to navigate into that or through it or not, right? We also have some examples from other projects where it's like, I want this to support the way that I grade, but I really don't, I want more student interaction in my classroom and I want to facilitate it that way. And so what can I do to make my Canvas site so that it's enough that I can give them feedback and provide these things, but encourage them to come engage in class discussion and conversation in the work of what happens in class. So it also, depends on what the goals are. And so I think, keeping those pieces in mind in that learner experience, what is you're trying to drive towards really matters. Other questions that people might have or comments?
I have one.
I can quickly respond to that. I think a big piece is trust and openness, and knowing McKenzie as a learner, knowing her excitement for the subject and her dedication to the subject. She's also an ROTC student and a person deeply interested in history, culture, and politics of the region. She sees language learning as super important. So she wants to get the most out of it, right? So I know her motivations for learning are really strong. And I think having that trust, having that already student-teacher relationship established makes you more open and more ready to accept the pitfalls that you had. I had so many aha moments, and you've heard about some today, obviously, right? So again, things that I took for granted because I'm kind of cooking within this material for years, right? So I think being ready on both sides to also, as a student, being able and not afraid to offer that critique and say, hey, this really doesn't make sense, right? How can we make it better? I think that was super important. I didn't think of it going in. I think I just started it because I knew McKenzie is so invested in the subject and in the summer language fellowships, and we've been training for her to complete interviews, and she's won a couple competitive summer language scholarships. So I knew she's really passionate about the field, and I think that made the groundwork possible. I hope this answers it.
I think. Yeah, and I think on my end, I think Sean and I's dynamic was very fertile for aggressive debate. But I think in particular, I think I can't exactly ascertain what kind of components of Sean and myself that exactly led to an environment that was that productive. But I can say a little bit more about my background. Again, the thing that I keep saying is, as I was working with Sean to do the Canvas Innovation Fund redesign, I was also teaching a summer class at the same time. So I think in myself, I had been involved within various educational endeavors at MIT for quite a while, both with the MITES office and Interface, if people are familiar, and then also with various programs at Northeastern. But I think on my side, so much of, and Sean especially as a fellow educator, I think we were always focused on providing a best experience for the student. So it was never really a question of whose idea is better, who came to the table with, something that made it through, our redesign, and, who presented the idea that, Aaron really co-signed from a pedagogical perspective. It was never anything like that. I think so much of it was we were very earnestly trying to design a Canvas site that facilitated an experience that was best for the students as learners. And I think we were united, on that front. And I think the other part that made, again, the debate so productive was I had, just because of my teaching experience, I had training in pedagogy much more kind of attuned to the K through 12 level, whereas Sean is much more focused in kind of not only in the university level, but working specifically with kind of upper division students, which is a different challenge than it is for the kind of first year experience. So I think we recognize in each other our Venn diagrams of pedagogical experience overlapped. They were both sizable, but the overlap was small, and I think that contributed to us putting a lot more good ideas on the table. So I think in the future, I think what I would look for in trying to create pairings between instructors and learning technologists is, is there that kind of shared experience but differing perspectives, and is there room for people to give, constructive feedback in a way that feels like an open dialogue? I think that had I not been as experienced as an educator, I don't think I would have had the wherewithal or the guts to really say, you know what, Sean, I don't know if I agree with the way that you're running the shop around here. So I think you're right. There needs to be some sort of give and take, but it's difficult to determine exactly how that dynamic is going to work before those kind of conversations start happening.
That what you described, that's the relationship you want with a colleague. Right, and even amongst the students, like again, our class is aimed at taking people from, students who think of themselves as physics students and getting them to think of themselves as physicists. That's what I want. I want junior colleagues. I don't want students in general, and that's the relationship I want with people. And so the fact that I had already worked with Cory for 2 semesters and knew what his backgrounds. Also, in the context of a lab course, you really get to know people, very individually. So I already knew from just random conversations in the lab that, okay, this guy actually knows what he's talking about. This is not a naive, the guy knows more about teaching than most, new junior faculty do. And so yeah, we had that trust and know that, once we start working with each other, we can work with each other the way 2 colleagues are working with each other as a project, not as a teacher superior in a student who has to receive something like that. That we can just talk to each other openly, and it doesn't matter whose idea it was. What matters is that we end up with the best idea that comes out at the end, and that's fine, and there's no ego in it. So that we had that relationship to start off with, I think, was a big success. And again, I think of that it's a colleague relationship.
Exactly.
Do you have any additions? I mean, your experience, I think, is a little bit different, right? In terms of working with your LT and background.
Well, Melly wasn't my student before, but she was part of the ESG learning community, so I already had a relationship outside of the classroom. And I completely agree that you build the trust, and you're working really with colleagues. And I think that the meetings, starting with the first meeting that we had, sitting all at the same table and saying, okay, this is what we're working with. This is what we have. This is what we're hoping. And we were listening to what everybody had to say in the room. It led us not just, we really did not compromise, but we came up with new ideas from all the different inputs. And when you talk about pairings, I think that it helps to have students and instructors that have maybe some experience, some previous experience together, not necessarily in the class, and some common interest, like you said, the overlap. It doesn't have to be a complete overlap, because we want the diversity of opinions to really enrich and be able to innovate.
I'll add one final piece, if I can, to that. If somebody wants to raise their hand or come to the mic for the last,
If you want the mic, just raise your hand.
I'll
bring it to you.
The thing I'll say is one of the things we purposely try to do in the training for the learning technologists is talk about actually having some of those conversations and what it means to have a positive relationship, but not one where you're just doing everything that you're being told to do all the time, right? What does it mean to actually try to sort of sit at that intersection of being able to provide feedback that's productive and sometimes hard, but not those pieces, right? So holding that sort of positive relationship in the first position, but also recognizing that there's work to be done. And so it sounds like at least some of that has worked along the way, which is great. Final question. My first thought is, I think my first reaction is I look up and I see some colleagues from MITx and Sheriff Huckman and some of our other colleagues from the MITx side who have that expertise in design and building these materials for the global group, right? I go back to something Chris said in the first panel, and I sort of put my own language to it, but it's this idea of learning is situated, right? It happens in a set of contexts with people in ways, and that situativeness matters in the way that we design. You've heard from our panelists today talking about the sort of way in which this happens here on campus with these specific courses, thinking about these specific sets of learners. And I think the way that we translate this to the world is we have to think very purposefully and do it in ways that match the technological abilities of the systems that we employ. To build it for those learners, for the larger sets of communities, understanding they're going to come from very different places with very different backgrounds and experiences and communities and all of these pieces. And then the other piece I'll say, because there's a bunch of colleagues in the room, we have great expertise in doing this work too, right? Like we have some examples of what that can look like effectively, and amplifying those stories, much like we sort of amplified these today, I think is one way forward for all of these pieces. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Sean,
just the notion of that the learning is situated in a learning environment. I think that is the key point to this. Everything we're talking about is, of course, residential location. So when we're talking about Canvas, what is it doing in our course? It's a tool. And I learned I was using the tool badly. And now I've learned to use it better. But it's just a tool. The learning is something else. The learning, of course, happens in the mind of the student, and the teachers just help facilitate that. When you're doing online education, whether it's MITx or some other platform, that thing that was just the tool is now the learning environment. And it's being used in a very different way. In a web page, it looks like the same web page, but you are not doing the same thing when you're running a fully online environment. So I was an MITx student in 2012, 6002, whichever that first one. I forced myself to be a student of that class, and there was aspects of at least that first run where you needed to go to the forums and talk with the other students in the live forums, right? And nobody's using that. Nobody's using the forums, at least in my Canvas class. We're having conversations in Slack, but so I think that distinction is that exactly said. Where is the learning situated in an online course? If the students are individually isolated, that's a tricky thing. The only learning environment is that web page. If it's a little bit more expanded, if there is some sort of forums or active community, that means you need community managers. There's a lot of people that sit behind those web pages. And that's the thing. So yeah, the way you would design, I think, any of our courses, if we were to just flip them and take our content and put them into make an online version of it, it's not simply take the thing we built for residential and just port the content out. It's really a complete redesign because you're using something that was a tool and trying to make it an environment, and that's different.
Yeah. Well, yes, I agree that it's a question of content, not only of format. And we all seem to agree on the really importance of having the students involved and the learner experience. So just brainstorming and connecting to the panel where we were talking about opening up the campus experience, I could envision some equivalent of learning technologists who are past MITx students and who could contribute to transform something that's existing with a similar design pattern, project manager, and so on. I'm just throwing out ideas.
Yeah, it's great. Okay, please join me in a round of applause for our panelists.